Welcome. This is the MSBA Naturalization Preparation webinar. I'm Rachel Ullman, a private practitioner in Rockville, Maryland.
And I'm Patty Chiriboga-Roby. I run the immigration clinic at the Immigration Outreach Service Center in Baltimore. We are happy that you are joining us today. The purpose of what we're going to talk about today is for you to understand your eligibility for naturalization. Why should you become a naturalized citizen? Learn what documents you will need. We want to help you be prepared before you file for naturalization, or if you will attend a naturalization workshop or clinic or seek representation. Recognize the issues that may require legal advice, and also know what are the risks that may prevent naturalization or could result in loss of your green card. It is important that you know that today, this presentation provides only general information. This is not legal advice, and some applicants should consult with an immigration attorney before going forward. So let's talk about the benefits of U.S. citizenship.
Great. So, one of the most important benefits is that U.S. citizens have the right to vote and fully participate in our political process. You can travel with a U.S. passport, which is nice and secure and comes with the benefit of being able to go through lines as a U.S. citizen. You can petition for more family members, which is a huge benefit of U.S. citizenship. And then, of course, there's protection from deportation because we do not deport our own citizens. And there are benefits that extend to your family because when a parent naturalizes and becomes a citizen, children who are permanent residents and are 17 years of age or younger automatically become U.S. citizens. So moving forward with citizenship is not only good for you, it's potentially very good for your family members.
And I want to highlight that sometimes when kids are getting into trouble, perhaps by the parent becoming a citizen, that makes sure that the children will not get into trouble with immigration if they're running into some trouble with the law. So it is really important that parents take the step to naturalize.
It's very nice because when those kids become citizens, it's automatic. So they may not even know they became a citizen and they'll be protected.
All right, so the eligibility.
Okay, so we're going to talk about basic eligibility requirements. The first one is that you have to be a lawful permanent resident, which we also refer to as being a green card holder. You have to be at least 18 years old. And you usually have to, under the general provision, have 5 years as a legal permanent resident, or you could apply early at 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen. Um, there's a key issue here about timing. USCIS allows applicants to file 90 days early before they reach the 5 or the 3 year requirement for continuous residence. But that early filing rule is limited. It applies only to the continuous resident requirement. It does not allow applicants to shortcut the other requirements, which must still be fully fulfilled or satisfied before you filed. And we'll talk about those next. So the takeaway here is that identify whether you're going to fall under the 5 years as a legal permanent resident, or you're going to be able to file under the 3 year category if you're married and living together with your U.S. citizen spouse. And then you have to understand the 90-day early filing option and make sure that all requirements are fully met before filing.
Okay.
Okay. So next we're going to talk about residence and physical presence. For most applicants, you must be physically in the United States for at least 30 months out of the last 5 years. If you're applying based on marriage to a U.S. citizen, that requirement is 18 months out of the past 3 years. So the first point is living in the United States more than half the time is a helpful way to think about it. But what USCIS is actually counting is the number of days that you're physically inside the United States. Separate from that is residence, which is about where you actually live. where your life is actually based. That's where continuous residence comes in, and why longer trips abroad, especially over 6 months, can raise issues, even if you still meet the physical presence requirement. And then finally, there's a separate requirement that you must have at least 3 months of residence in your state before filing. So physical presence is the math, residence is where your life is based, and you need to meet both before you file. Let's talk about travel outside of the United States. So trips over 6 months can create problems because immigration officers can scrutinize a returning permanent resident who's returning to the US after a trip longer than 6 months. These types of trips raise a presumption that your continuous residence has been broken. And you can overcome that by showing that your life, your home, job, and ties remained in the United States. Um, Second, trips of 1 year or more usually are much more serious. In most cases, they break the continuous residence automatically, meaning your naturalization clock resets unless a narrow exception applies. And importantly, this is not an abandonment of your green card. You can make a long trip, return as a permanent resident, and still have to restart your timeline for citizenship. So the takeaway from this is that shorter trips are usually fine. Longer trips require an explanation, and trips over a year will generally delay your eligibility to naturalize.
And my question, Rachel, is if somebody's stuck outside for more than a year, will they be allowed to return as a permanent resident?
That's a great question. So yes, they should be allowed to return. One option is that they could visit their U.S. consulate and see whether they could get a returning resident immigrant visa, or it's also possible that you'd be able to get on the airplane with your green card, and then you would have a bit of explaining to do when you travel and are trying to enter the United States. Once you land here, very likely you are going to end up having to see an immigration judge and explain that you did not abandon your residency, even though you were out of the country for a long time.
But you will come in, and the border CBP cannot take away your green card on entry, so you will be allowed in. All right. So how do you know when you've traveled?
Yeah. So for people who, especially for people who have done a lot of traveling, this might be a difficult list to make. And it's a required list because you're going to have to identify your travel for the past 5 years on your naturalization application. So we suggest that you start by checking your passport stamps because hopefully you were stamped in and out, and you'll be able to figure out where you went and when you went. And you could look at your airline confirmations because everybody has something that came through their email at this point that's going to help them remember when they took their trips. You can review your phone photos, your lovely vacation pictures, as well as your calendars. And then you're going to want to write down your dates of travel before you start before you go to your clinic where people might be trying to help you. You'll have a complete list, which will be extremely helpful. And if none of those tips were good, you can, ask your family and friends who traveled with you if you can remember who you traveled with. So, but you don't want to try to reconstruct this travel history on the spot. So this is something that is a very good idea to do early on in
Right.
the process. All right, Patty, do you
And
want to?
I was going to say, and ultimately, if you don't remember your travel, I've had people who travel a lot. They need to be let the officer know this is my best memory. I'm not absolutely sure because immigration will know your travel. It's also important you have to count the days in. So prepare this
Right.
in advance. Yeah.
Right. You have to know how much you were out so that you know how much you're in. And that you bring up a great point. I mean, a lot of the naturalization process is just being honest. So if you honestly don't remember something and you admit it up
Before.
front, then you're really minimizing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um,
So let's talk about a
yeah.
new requirement that USCIS has indicated. And there's always been a requirement of good moral character, but now the policy is that it is the obligation of the applicant to show that they're a person of good moral character. And USCIS has indicated the factors they're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at the criminal history. And though they are looking for good moral character during the period that you have to have your green card, either 3 or 5 years, they can actually look at all your history and see how that reflects on your good moral character during the period that's required. They also want to see at your taxes. Have you filed all the tax returns you're required to file and paid all your taxes? They're asking to find out that you have always supported your children and that indicate that what family ties you have in the United States. They want to see your community participation. Are you involved in groups, civic groups, or religious groups? They are also looking at education or training. So if you've had any degrees or any certificates of training, you want to let them know. And as Rachel already alluded, it's important to show honesty in everything in all your past applications, but particularly in the naturalization application. So whereas before, if you didn't have any black marks against you and you passed the test, you would be able to become a citizen. Now, USCIS has indicated that they want you to prove that you merit citizenship. Citizenship is a privilege, and they have been moving a little bit more to deny applications just because they feel they don't have to exercise favorable discretion. And so it is in your best interest to present your application as strong as possible before going forward.
So, Patty, I had a question about child support. So, some people have informal arrangements with the mother of their children, or possibly the father of their children, the place that their children are living, and they're just giving them cash because they're on good terms or good enough, and they're handing them cash to cover child support. So when it comes down to the naturalization application, they don't really have any proof that they've been paying child support. What do you suggest that people do?
Well, when a parent lives with a child in the home, it's sort of a given that they're supporting. But if there's been a separation or a divorce and the children under age 18 are not living with a parent, then USCIS is going to look more carefully. If you don't have proof, in some ways it's better that you don't have a child support order, a court order, but nevertheless, one of the ways you can overcome that is by letters of reference, a character letter, and you could have friends or family members or even the mother of the child who can in fact write and say, yes, this applicant has been a good parent, a good person. Um, we don't know exactly what USCIS is looking with this new emphasis on the requirement to show good moral character. So it is better to give them more than less. And you can, if you have any things that are not clear or you've got any negative factors in your application, get some character letter references from friends, family, employers that can say, yes, this is a good person, or this he was a good parent, he supports his children, he volunteers, whatever good factors you have, I think is going to make it better for you. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Um, I guess one of the things that they could also look at is have you ever been sued for lack of child
right,
support?
right.
So it is important that you,
I, I, I think a really good idea, at least to try to get a letter from the mother or the father who is the person who would have received the child support, especially if you've been paying, and just have them write a letter explaining
yeah,
that you've been receiving money in cash. There's no paper trail here, but the applicant has done a good job of supporting their child and providing child support.
yeah, yeah. All right. Another requirement is for men who have been in the United States between the ages of 18 and 26. They are required to register for selective service. Selective service registration is sort of like a list if they ever were to institute the draft. At this point, it's only for men. But the naturalization applicant has to demonstrate that they have registered, and they're supposed to bring proof of registration. And it is easy to get that. You can go online if you registered. Most of the kids do it at the time of high school when everybody registers, and you can get the letter. If you didn't register, It is going to be okay if it was because you didn't know, you didn't intentionally fail to register. And you can get a letter also from Selective Service that you didn't register. I've never had any problem on the application if the applicant writes and says, I didn't register because I didn't know about it, but I would have registered if I had known. I've never had anyone who says, I don't want to. That would be a problem.
Yeah,
And I have heard that sometimes USCIS officers look at this carefully, but really the issue is willful failure to register. So if the individual just didn't register because they didn't know, they didn't think they had the green card or the right status at the time, then it's not a problem if you can just explain that.
what happens if you have a 40-year-old and he says he didn't register?
Um, because there's a requirement of either 3 or 5 years of good moral character. So if you have somebody who's over 31 years of age, then they can no longer register. This should not apply to them. And it should not be an issue.
That's great to know.
All right, so let's talk about the English and civics test for naturalization. So the basic requirement is that you speak English at they say like a third grade level. You need to be able to speak and understand English. You will need to be able to read and write simple English sentences and also pass the test of civics questions about U.S. history. There is now a new test where there is a pool of a total of 125 questions, and you have to be able to answer correctly on 12 out of the 20 questions. They're not very complicated, but there are some new questions on the test. And because the test is the process is not taking that long, sometimes I've had individuals who want to file and say, "Oh, I'm going to learn English. I'm going to take classes." If you're called for an interview in 3 to 5 months, which is not out of the ordinary, that may not give you enough time to learn English or to, for some people, it is a little more difficult to become familiar and with a test with the questions. So as soon as you start thinking about filing for naturalization, you want to know that you can be prepared on time. Yeah. Um, how do you study for the civics test?
So they've made it rather easy for us to study for the civics test. You can find all the questions at this website on the slide, and it's very nice. It's one-stop shopping. The a single study page, and from there you can access everything, the full list of questions, printable flashcards, audio recordings, a mobile app, and other practice tools. So you don't have to guess what you have to study or where to find it. And I suggest that a very good approach is to study a small number of questions each day and practice answering them out loud, because it's going to work where you are going to have to answer this question out loud at the interview. So it's a good time to start practicing. And short answers are acceptable. You're going to see when you look at the questions that they do have short answers for each of them. And so as long as you make the time to do it, you should be able to memorize all the answers to the questions. We've gotten, as Patty has alluded to here, we have some new questions, and so let's have a little fun. Patty, let's see if you know the answer to one of the new civics questions on the test. When did women get the right to vote?
1920.
Ooh,
And we know that because we looked it up. We don't
yes.
always know, even though we are very familiar with U.S. history, there are many little facts that we may not be familiar. So it's good to review before you go forward.
Oh, yes. Even if you went to high school here, please, please, please look at these questions and don't assume that you can just walk in and answer them, because they're a little harder than you think.
Right. I, I would venture to say that most Americans might not be able to pass the test without studying, without being familiar.
I think that you're absolutely right.
All right, so let's talk about the process. For the application to submit the N400, first, as you've seen, you always want to use the uscis.gov website. There are similar websites that don't end in the .gov extension that are fraudulent, and they can lead you astray or cost you, waste your money. The form that you will be submitting is the form N400. And the cost of the application is $760 to submit the N-400 when you're sending it by mail. The cost of an application that you're doing online, the form is you can do it on the website, is $710, and you have to have a USCIS account that you open your own USCIS account. Remember that you are paying for immigration to review the application. You're not paying for citizenship. So if you don't meet the requirements, they will deny you, and you will have paid these fees. Now, some individuals may qualify to pay a reduced fee of $380 depending on your income. And as you do the application, they ask questions about your income, and you may request to pay the reduced fee. And some individuals may qualify to proceed without any fee, and they will need to submit the additional form I-912. They will need to show that they qualify to have the fee waived. And you can qualify if you have already been approved to receive means tested benefits by the government. That's benefits for cash benefits for individuals with low income, or if you earn less than 150% of the poverty level, or if you can show a financial hardship. Now, those sometimes it's a little bit difficult to qualify for the fee. And if you ask to waive the fee, you cannot submit the application online. You have to submit it on paper. And it does take often 1 to 2 months for immigration to just respond to see if they will accept your fee waiver. And if they don't, then they will send it back and ask you to pay the fee. Lastly, I wanted to clarify that the reduced fee is for individuals that earn between 150% and 400% of the poverty level. And you can look on the immigration website to see what the amount is for your household to see if you'd be eligible to waive the fee.
Yeah, and I think we're all seeing that any of these requests for fee waivers or reduced fee may slow down the application process.
Um, all right, so let's talk about the actual English and civics test.
Right. Okay. So some applicants will qualify for exceptions to the English requirement based on their age and how long they've had a green card. There are two main combinations to remember. If you're 55 years old and you've had your green card for 15 years, or you're 50 years old and you've had your green card for 20 years as a legal permanent resident, then you can take the civics test in your own language, but remember that you will need to bring your own interpreter. You may be allowed to take an easier civics test if you are 65 years of age or older and 20 years as a legal permanent resident. You'll be asked you will be asked up to 20 questions, which you'll have to answer 6 of them correctly. And you'll know which questions to study because they're going to be marked by an asterisk on the question list. So when you see those 120 odd questions, only look at the 20 that have the asterisk next to them.
Now, I have a question for you, Rachel. What happens if you study and you just can't learn the material to pass the test?
Yeah, so that brings us to our next slide. Thank you, Patty. So if you really can't learn the English or civics, you still can become a naturalized citizen. It's just going to take a little more paperwork. USCIS allows some applicants to request a disability exception, and they do this on Form N648. This is the exception to the English and civics testing requirements. The form must be completed by a qualified medical professional, and it must clearly explain the condition that makes the applicant unable, mind you, unable and not just that it's difficult to meet those requirements. So the timing also matters. The medical certification generally should not be more than 180 days old when the application is filed because it will have expired. And in more serious cases, where the applicant really can't even meaningfully contribute at the interview, even those applicants may be able to naturalize. So if they can't participate, and even if they can't take the oath, USCIS allows a legal guardian, a surrogate, or certain family members to act on their behalf and complete the process. The oath itself would be waived for somebody who can't understand it in that circumstance. These cases are absolutely possible, but they do require careful documentation and often are best handled with legal guidance. So the best takeaway from this slide is that a disability does not prevent naturalization, but it does require proper documentation and preparation.
And also, sometimes people may not have ever learned to read and write because they never had the opportunity to go to school. That doesn't mean that they will qualify for a disability waiver. And they may be able to learn if they are given the opportunity to go to school, learn English, or learn how to read and write in their own language, depending on how long they've been a permanent resident. But it's never too late to go to school.
That's right. And if you want to live here and be a US citizen, it's always good to know how to speak the language and know something about our history.
Right, so let's talk about what are the actual documents that you're going to be gathering as you evaluate whether you're eligible for citizenship and you begin to prepare your application. So you definitely will need your green card and both sides of the green card. Um, Actually, on occasion, somebody has lost their green card. If you have the copy, you will be submitting the copy alone. And it may be okay if you don't have the actual green card for the interview, but you will need a copy of both sides of the green card. Um, if you have traveled for longer than 6 months, you will need to submit the passport, but you want to have your passport on hand so you can evaluate your travel. You want to gather your tax returns to make sure that you have filed your tax returns, and it's a good idea to make sure that they're being properly filed for the years that you require to have good moral character. If there's been any change since you're permanent resident in terms of marriage or divorce records, you want to gather them and have copies. And you will need to get court records of any criminal, perhaps also traffic cases, and we'll talk more about that. But it is very important that before you go forward or decide to submit an application, that you evaluate whether you're eligible. So all these are documents that will help you identify your eligibility for naturalization, including, as Rachel said, writing down your travel history to know if you you've been here long enough. And we believe it's best practice to have a copy of past immigration applications. Um, it, Although the officer's looking at the naturalization application that you submit, they are also reviewing whatever you've said in the past. And if the information doesn't is not in agreement with what you've written in the past, then you could have a problem. Are they saying, are you being dishonest now? Were you dishonest in the past? So it's much better to review past applications and see what was written in the past. Also because sometimes people forget, but what you wrote in the past is likely going to be more contemporaneous with the events as they happen. So we always believe it's good to have those to review before you go forward.
So I had a question about the tax returns. How important do you think it is when you look over your past 5 years of tax returns, if you see something that might not be right, maybe income was left off or you filed in a questionable filing status category, do you think it's necessary to go back and clean these up by making amendments to your prior taxes, or is it just enough that you filed it?
Well, um, everyone who earns income is required to file their taxes, and that includes permanent residents. And you're supposed to file the right amount of taxes. So, on occasion, people have done their taxes, and it may not even be that they're aware that their taxes weren't properly done. Oftentimes, people rely on help, but it is the job of that preparer to make sure that they're preparing your taxes correctly. It's not their job to make you pay the least amount of taxes. Their job is to make you pay the right amount of taxes. And I have seen individuals who, unbeknownst to them, without any awareness, their taxes claimed that they had a business that they never knew about, and they were claiming deductions, or they had expenses that were not real. So I'm not a tax expert. So as a permanent resident, unrelated to naturalization, you should have your taxes properly because if you get in trouble with the IRS, you will get in trouble with immigration. Now, sometimes I can just quickly look at the tax return and see that there are some things that are obviously not correct. Someone was married and filed as head of household to pay less tax. Um, if I can catch it, my suspicion is that the officer is also going to catch it. And it could be that they say, you were trying to cheat on your taxes, you don't have good moral character. They deny you naturalization. You're submitting information to one agency about what you've provided to a different agency. So ideally, you want to correct your taxes before going forward, but it is your risk. As the same thing as when you file your tax return, you are running the risk if somebody has guided you or if you've completed the tax returns that are improper. The risk is that you're taking that any form that you complete with the government is done under the penalty of perjury. So it's always better to correct them fully. If you go forward without tax returns that are improperly done or clearly improperly done, you run the risk that immigration not only can deny naturalization, but can have the IRS pay attention.
Patty, what if the applicant owes the government taxes from prior years?
That's a good question. So, in theory, the best is if you've paid all your taxes that you owe. Um, if you owe taxes that are it's not a substantial amount, I think you could file the naturalization and still and make sure that you've paid it by the time you go to your interview. I've heard anecdotally that officers have a problem if people owe taxes. It shouldn't be because a tax return in a way is a contract and there's a difference in how much an individual believes they owe, and that's something that is being negotiated with the government. Uh, but particularly at this time, I think it's advisable to have paid all your taxes. In the past, it was possible if you had entered into a tax payment plan to show that you were complying with the tax payment plan, and that could have been sufficient. I think things are being looked at with a greater degree of scrutiny, and I think it would be better to have your taxes paid before you file. Now,
Yeah.
the least risk if you have it everything paid before you submit the application. Certainly, I would be willing to I think that as long as it's paid before you go to the interview, which is only going to be a few months, so it buys you a little time. What do you think?
Right. Well, the most cautious approach is to make sure that your taxes are paid before you file, because that's the point at which you're saying, I'm ready to naturalize. I meet all the requirements. I have good moral character. You're going to really love me. So if you can manage that, that would be best. That's the least risky. But I also think that if you can't manage that, then at least have a payment plan in
Right,
place because it's still there. You're still allowed to do this. I think that our concern is the new good moral
right.
character scrutiny. But of course, if you entered into a payment plan, you've got your contract there, you're promising to pay. So in theory, this should certainly still be fine.
Yeah. And owing taxes is not evidence of lack of good moral character. Lots of things happen in life. As long as you're going to pay your obligations in time, I think that's fine. But the government may think that it's a lack of good moral character.
And
Yeah.
if you did enter into a payment plan, you should bring your payment plan documents
Right.
with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So you need to get your court records. We talked about if you've ever been cited or arrested. If you've ever been stopped by the police or any law enforcement, and this is even before you were a permanent resident, you want to obtain court certified dispositions. Even if you have submitted them before or when you became a permanent resident, you want to have them on hand with the application, and you want to have them on hand to evaluate if something has changed, if it could reflect negatively on your eligibility for a naturalization. You need the court certified dispositions, even if the charges were dismissed or even if the records were expunged. And Rachel's going to talk more about expungement, but expunging a record only removes it from the public record. Immigration will see all your criminal records. They will take your fingerprints and they will know any criminal charge or arrest that you had anywhere in the United States. So you want to be careful. Now, sometimes individuals have been arrested and nothing happened. They were released. If you can, it would be good to obtain the police record to show that there were no charges filed. I've heard anecdotally that USCIS officers want proof of that. So the more you are prepared before you decide to go forward, the better your chances are that you're going to be successful. It's also a good idea to get the Motor Vehicle Administration record of use citation. There are traffic violations that are considered criminal, and there are some that are not. So if you just get a speeding ticket by a camera, you can just pay. You don't have to go to court. That is just a violation. It doesn't really count against you. But if you got a citation for which you had to go to court, that means that there's potentially the possibility of some jail time, and that could be a problem. So if you get your MBA, and you have no citations, great. It shows good moral character. Or if not, you can determine if those citations that you have could reflect poorly on your character. So that's why you want to gather all these documents before you file to evaluate your eligibility.
So, Patty, when you help people fill out their naturalization applications, what do you do with all those pesky speed camera tickets?
I think that if it's just a speed camera, they can just let the officer. Well, you want to be careful on the question asked. So sometimes when the officer says, "Have you ever been arrested, cited, or detained?" Citation means any citation. And I think a client should say, "Look, I've gotten speed cameras. I don't really remember. I think it's okay. Ideally, if you can let all your history, let the officer know, that's better. But if it is just camera tickets, I think that that's not going to be a problem. If you had to go to court, then you definitely want to evaluate how that impacts you.
Right,
Yeah,
certainly if you went to court. And I think with those camera tickets, so that you don't have to guess whether they're important or not, you can always just say, I've had a series of speed camera tickets that were
right.
were paid. There, it's going to be fine, and then you are not going to get in trouble for not mentioning something
Right.
that your particular examiner might have been interested in.
Also, as you gather the documents to prepare before you file for naturalization, you want to remember what happened. And sometimes it is difficult that you had, sometimes you've had an arrest and you don't remember what it was about. And it may take a little time to jog your memory. So write down what the incident was about so that if you then get assistance, you will get guidance as to how that arrest will impact you. Yeah.
I think that if you have an arrest and you can't remember what that arrest was about, it would be a really good idea to come in with a list of all of your interactions with the police and the criminal justice system before you start any naturalization
Right.
clinic.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, I've had incidents where individuals have had, multiple arrests. Most of them are minor. They might, if they cannot remember through the records, they might again ask family members, do you remember what this was about, to try and reconstruct? You will be put on the spot at the naturalization interview to explain those incidents. So you definitely want to have that information before you go forward.
But the good news is that they will have reviewed their prior files. And so if any of these things had taken place prior to the time
Right.
that the applicant got their green card, they're going to be able to see what they knew about it back
Right.
then.
You want to get your criminal record. So, Rachel, how can you get the criminal record?
Okay. So you're going to want to get a criminal record for any cases, for all cases, and even those that were dismissed, expunged, or where no charges were filed, just as Patty finished explaining to us. Maryland does have an automatic expungement after a few years for certain types of cases, like dismissals or not guilty findings. But even if a case is expunged, you still need to tell immigration about it and bring the records. So, how are we going to get these records? In Maryland, you can request your records through CJIS on Reisterstown Road, and the address is on the slide. And you can also obtain an FBI report using fingerprints, which can help you identify cases in other locations. The- and because there's also the issue that courts have retention policies and they may not keep your records forever. So this FBI, the ability of the FBI to at least let you know that there were other arrests or charges against you is going to be very helpful because then you can, from that point, move forward and try to obtain other records. So, what about the records that no longer exist because of the court's decision that they are just going to automatically get rid of records after a certain time? For those, you should document the court's retention policy. All the courts have a written retention policy. And so if you can no longer get a documentation about a criminal case that you had, you should give affirmatively the retention policy to explain why you are no longer able to request and obtain that document. And as to the cases in other states, just because we're living in Maryland doesn't mean that immigration is not interested in your entire criminal history. So if you've been wandering around the country and getting into trouble in other states for any reason, you are going to want to find a way to get those documentation. And I suggest that if you don't have the documents and a prior attorney doesn't have the documents anymore, that you Google for the documents. So you would put into your search the state's name, criminal history record check, or perhaps the state name, court records check, and court records search. And then you'd look for the official government websites because there's usually a way on those websites to request your records.
Um, and the important thing is for you to, it's in your best interest to remember. I have had cases where an individual might have totally forgotten, and it's not until the interview that the officer says, well, any more charges or arrests? No. Are you sure? No. Well, do you remember this case? And then they remember, and it may be too late. So you really want to search your memory for any trouble that you've had with the police. And you can't just rely on, oh, it was just a little thing, or it was dismissed, or it was probation, because you need to let the officer know what actually happened. So you have to remember.
I think at that point, when the officer is pressing and really asking if there's anything else, that would be a good time to pause. Pause and rethink. And if you have any documents with you, perhaps look at them again to see if you missed something. And maybe if you don't know, just be honest with the officer and say, well, perhaps there's something there that I've missed. I didn't mean to. I don't have those files in front
Right.
of me.
But this is to the best of my memory. Yes, you want to be as truthful as possible. So the other thing we talked about is reviewing your past applications with USCIS. And how can you find your past immigration applications if you don't have them in a designated box at home for them?
So what we're suggesting is perhaps the first step is see if a prior attorney has your file, because that is going to be your fastest way to get your past applications. If your prior attorney doesn't have your file or you filed it on your own and you didn't keep your documentation, it's okay. There's a way to get it. It's through the Freedom of Information Act. You're going to make a Freedom of Information Act request with the USCIS. Those are the same people that you are filing your naturalization application with. You're going to create a USCIS account, and we have the website on the slide, and you can make your Freedom of Information Act request directly online. And that will be great because they will process it for you. There is no fee, and they will give it to you electronically. But it's also important that if you've ever been in removal proceedings, that you get a copy of your file from the immigration judge and perhaps the Board of Immigration Appeals. And these are all together under the Executive Office of Immigration Review. Fortunately, if you don't have those applications or files, it's okay because you can make another Freedom of Information Act request and you can get your entire file from the Executive Office of Immigration Review. And we've given you the website to make your request on this slide.
So you've gathered all the documents to evaluate if you should go forward. After reviewing everything, you realize that there are no obstacles. So what are actually the documents that need to be submitted with the naturalization application? Well, we've talked about is the N-400 form from the USCIS website. You're going to include the payment. Now, they no longer accept check or money order. You have to pay either by credit or debit. And those are the forms that get from the website that you would complete with your credit card or debit information to have the money paid. Unless you're filing with the fee waiver application of the I-912, if you're eligible, you want to submit a copy of both sides of the green card. You don't need to make a copy a huge, just a small copy is fine. Sometimes you don't have to have a big uh, entire page copy. You definitely want to submit a copy of all the criminal charges that we've discussed, court certified dispositions, which means the court, you've gone to the court and they've given you a seal or a true test copy so that the government can make sure that, in fact, this document is from the court and it's not someone that you just prepared. And you want to include the evidence of good moral character that we discussed, right? You want to, that will be your tax returns that you've submitted, the any good character reference letters. We talked about their certificates of training. Any favorable factors in your application would all be included in the evidence of good moral character. You also want to, if you've traveled for longer than 6 months, you will need to include a copy of the passport to show the dates of travel. Um, so,
So, Patty, just to be clear, if I'm filing my N-400, in order to pay for it, I have to give a separate form. Is that correct?
correct. That's the form that authorizes immigration to deduct the fee for them to review the application. Correct. Now, if you're submitting it online, you will be uploading these documents as well. And a very important thing is whatever you submit, keep a copy. I always say keep an identical copy of whatever you submit to the government, because when it's time for the interview, or if you want additional help from someone, you want to know exactly what you submitted. So.
And Patty, if you're submitting by mail instead of electronically uploading, do you suggest that you give the original court certified disposition?
I think just a copy. Take all original documents with you to the actual interview. Uh, 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 you're submitting copies, but the immigration has a right to look at those documents. But no, because it could get lost in the mail, so I wouldn't submit the original court
I,
disposition.
I think that's a really good idea because sometimes the examiner might have trouble finding it at the time of the interview,
Yes,
and you may have given away your only original court certified disposition.
correct. Yeah. All right, so what is the actual timeline of this applications once you decide you're eligible, you want to go forward? So you file the forms that we discussed. And as we mentioned, you submit only the copies. After you submit the forms, you will get a receipt from immigration that you have an N-400 application pending. If you've paid any fee, your receipt will indicate how much money you paid. If you ask for a fee waiver, they sometimes take a long time to send the receipt because I think they're more prompt when they're receiving money that they have to issue a receipt. After that, you will be getting an appointment for biometrics. They will be taking your fingerprints, and that is when immigration will find out your criminal record from your fingerprints. Um, and subsequently, you will be called in for an interview at the local USCIS district office. In Maryland, it is in Baltimore that you will be going for the appointment. And don't be surprised, they now have had interviews on Saturdays, sometimes even on some holidays, and they can start as early as 7:30 in the morning. So you just don't be surprised if that's your appointment. And at the interview, and Rachel will talk more about the interview, but you will be given the English and the civics test. And if you pass the English and the civics test, um, it sometimes they will have an oath ceremony at the Baltimore district office the same day, depending on what time your appointment is. And other times they will call you at a different time to take the oath.
Sometimes you can get very lucky if you have a morning interview and they're having a afternoon oath ceremony, but don't count on it.
Yeah, you never know. All right, so what happens at the interview, Rachel? Walk us through.
Okay, so You're going to get to the Baltimore district office if you're viewing this in Maryland, and you'll be placed under oath. And the officer will go through your application with you and ask some basic questions. You'll also have a simple English conversation and take the civics and history test that we talked about earlier. In some cases, the interview may be conducted by video. You may be led over to an office. You think you are going to see a live person behind the desk, and you will find out that the interview is on the computer with a live interview happening, but not with the interviewer in the presence of the office. And that's okay. The interview is going to be basically exactly the same, but your officer is going to be on a screen. Um, the officer is going to use basic everyday English. They're not trying to trick you. So if you've been following along with our webinar today and you can understand what we've been talking about, you are going to understand the examiner and the examiner's language. They're looking for consistency and honesty. So if everything goes well and you're approved, the next step is going to be the oath ceremony.
So, what is the oath?
Hmm. So this on our screen is the actual oath of allegiance, and you'll be happy to know I am not going to read it to you, but here it is, and you can read it. It's part of the naturalization application. So when you become a U.S. citizen, you're agreeing to support the Constitution and laws of the United States and to give up loyalty to any other country. The oath also includes a commitment that, if required by law, you would serve in the military, perform non-combatant service, or do work of national importance under civilian direction. Now, some people have concerns about that. There are limited exemptions available, but those are based on deeply held religious beliefs or moral beliefs, not personal or political preferences. So even with an exemption, you may still be required to perform non-combatant service or other work of national importance. So the key takeaway from this is that citizenship comes with both rights and responsibilities, and this is a meaningful commitment.
And you do want to read it in advance so that you make sure that you understand the language. Some of this language is kind of difficult. It's pretty advanced. You won't have to memorize it, but you want to understand the words. So you might want to look in advance in a dictionary to know what it is that the oath says.
Right, because in order to say you understand it, you would actually need to understand the words, but you don't have to memorize it.
Correct. All right, so let's talk some tips for the interview.
All right. Tip number one, arrive early. Always a good idea. You don't want to have to worry that you're going to be delayed by traffic. And sometimes there's a lot of traffic to get to Baltimore. You want to bring your original documents. You want to remember to answer honestly. So that includes even the situation where you don't remember something. So if you're asked a question and you don't remember, be honest about it. And if the officer is speaking to you and you don't understand something that the officer has said, maybe they said it too quickly, maybe they used a word you don't understand, maybe they have a very thick accent, you can ask them to repeat the question. It's okay. They're just sitting across the desk from you. So be prepared. Honesty goes a long way in this process, and you should be fine.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's perfectly okay if you're nervous.
yes.
I think that, in fact, asking the officer, saying, I don't understand, is a way of telling the officer, I'm paying attention. Because sometimes when it's a second language, you sometimes say yes, yes, and you get the gist, but you want to understand. So it's a good thing. And if you're nervous, to let the officer know to slow down, to say it a different way.
Oh, if I'm at a naturalization interview with someone and the person's nervous, it's one of the first things I tell the examiner, just
Absolutely.
so that they can lower the anxiety level just a little bit.
All right. So, um, what are the things can delay your naturalization? And we've talked about them. Missing travel history, then that can be a problem. You want to get that information in advance. If you have missing divorce records or marriage records, the officer will request them if you don't have them at the interview. Missing court dispositions. Invariably, the officer is going to issue a request for evidence, and your application is going to take much longer because they put it aside until the time that they can review it. So that's why you want to be prepared. Or if an application is incomplete, that can also lead to delay in the naturalization application. Now, when do you talk to a lawyer?
Right. You might really decide that you'd like to talk to a lawyer before you file. So in certain circumstances, that may be your best move. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So if there's been any arrest or detention after getting your green card, that might be a moment to pause to evaluate and speak to a lawyer. If you're filing based on a marriage to a United States citizen and you're separated, or it looks like you might be separated, that would be a moment to pause and talk to an attorney or a legal representative. If there's been errors, incorrect information, if you failed to include information or made misrepresentation in past applications, that's the time to speak to an attorney. If you took a trip longer than 6 months, as we discussed, there's going to be a presumption there that could cause you a problem. If you fail to pay child support, again, that's going to go back to the good moral character issue, and you're not going to want to go ahead and necessarily file that without first speaking to an attorney to see how that's going to affect your application. So, if you've ever claimed you are a U.S. citizen by registering to vote, if you've ever voted or applied for a job by indicating that you are a U.S. citizen, this is a very important moment to pause and see an attorney because this might cause you a lot of problems, many more than just being denied naturalization. And that's one of the risks of applying to naturalize is that your entire situation is going to be looked at, how you got your green card, if you did anything after your green card that could now cause you to be deportable, and such as claiming to be a US citizen or voting. So you want to really treat that as a very risky category and make sure that you speak to someone so that you don't accidentally endanger your green card. And again, as we discussed, applying for a disability waiver is complicated. It's going to involve another form. It's going to involve talking to the right doctor to have it filled out. So we suggest do not try applying for a disability waiver on your own without legal advice.
So, as Rachel mentioned, these are the red flags. So, what are the dangers of proceeding without consulting a lawyer? Now, no one is required to have an attorney, but it's always a good idea if there's any red flags to go consult with an attorney before going forward. And when we've been mentioning an attorney or a lawyer in this presentation, we're also including uh, individuals who have been accredited by the Department of Justice to provide immigration legal services if they work for an organization that is recognized by the Department of Justice and they function just as a lawyer. So if you go forward and you have one of these red flags in your case, and you haven't made sure that this does not disqualify you, USCIS could conclude that you lack good moral character because of the errors on the N-400 that shows that you intended to misrepresent, or errors in the past, applications that you're not admitting now, certain prior criminal charges could be a problem. Or worse, USCIS could conclude that not only should you be denied your naturalization, but that you should lose your status and you would be placed in removal proceedings in front of the immigration judge if they conclude that perhaps, for example, you were improperly granted your permanent residence. There were factors that they were not aware of that would have disqualified you for your green card. Or sometimes it's that USCIS made a mistake and granted your permanent residence, but it wasn't appropriate, it wasn't the right time, you weren't in the right category, they will come back and say, whoops, sorry, we made a mistake, but you should not have been approved for permanent residence, and you will be placed in removal proceeding. And certain prior criminal charges could also not only result in loss of your naturalization, but make you removable. So that is why you, before going forward, whether you are going to be proceeding on the application without actual attorney representation or you're going to be attending a naturalization clinic, if there are these red flags, it is important to speak with an attorney that's familiar with these issues before you decide to submit your application. And as we have alluded several times, not getting good legal advice in this could not only result in loss of your naturalization, the money involved, but also possible deportation process. So there are some additional special issues for some permanent residents at this moment. USCIS is pausing the applications of individuals from certain countries because government has indicated they want to look more carefully at the applications and the vetting process of those countries. And USCIS has also postponed the oath ceremonies of individuals from those countries at this time. We don't anticipate that'll be for long, but for now, that has caused a delay.
Patty, do you have an idea for anyone who's already completed their naturalization interview and they really should have been scheduled for an oath ceremony by now, or they were scheduled for an oath ceremony and then they weren't? Is there anything that they can do to try to nudge this along?
They should be granted a decision after 120 days. It is possible to sue the government. You can go force the government to make a decision. That can be a little costly and that definitely does require representation, but it is possible. Or you could just wait.
You could just wait.
All right. So, where can you get help? These links are where you can get the list of DOJ accredited representatives, and they are able to assist because sometimes it is difficult and difficult to find an attorney. Also, the second link are nonprofits as well as attorneys that represent individuals in removal proceedings, and they have greater expertise. Also, know that the governor in Maryland has given his full support in trying to get eligible permanent residents to naturalize. So they are redoing their website, but when it is completed, they will have additional information of where you can attend. There will be naturalization workshops and clinics, and so you will be better served if you go with all the documents that we've given you information so that you can go forward and be prepared. And beware of getting help from individuals who are not authorized to provide legal assistance because they don't know what they don't know and they're going to give you bad advice. And recently, we've heard some individuals are being led to believe that they're actually being represented by an attorney, but they're not. So you want to verify and check, make sure that the individual representing you is who they are and that they're authorized and have the knowledge to assist you. So
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Patty. This was
and to Rachel, I hope that this has helped many of you and that many of you can become U.S. citizens.
Thank you for attending.